Yeah, for those of you that join Ms. Margaret Nencheck and myself for the lunch presentation, um, the purpose really is to talk about great power competition on the Africa continent and point out challenges and opportunities really for our TSOC folks there. I will go very quickly because the important member of this team is Ms. Nencheck, who is the CAG at SOCAFRICA. My portion of this presentation is to talk about China and Russia in Africa, both from historical, long-term, and recent perspectives. And I'll start with changing my glasses so I can see the slides. So these are the themes and questions that we'll go over. I'll go over for the next 15 minutes of this presentation. The historical perspective, China has early involvement in Africa as early as 954 BC. I'll let you can read that. Vasco da Gama sailed around Africa in 1498. That giraffe you see there was brought to the Ming Dynasty, the emperor of the Ming Dynasty in 1415 from Somalia. I'm going to fast forward centuries to a historical perspective and really after the Cold War. But at the Bandung Conference in 1955, China declared its intent to help liberation fighters throughout the world. And this really became the hallmark of the 50s China experience in Africa, where they agreed to try and help sort of the colonial rebellion against colonialism. During the Cold War, China offered military intelligence weapons training to those countries trying to overthrow colonialism. And this support appealed to young African nationalists, those who became presidents or prime ministers of their countries. In the 1960s, African leaders considered China an economic development model also because they suffered from similar economic uncertainty, and they seemed to adopt or adapt. They thought that China's agrarian reform and industrial reform could be a model for African states. China lost favor in Africa. It's interesting, we're talking about the enemy of my enemy is my friend, and IR terms like bandwagoning and when the Soviet Union, we talked about this today, that in the Soviet Union and China, when their relationship fell apart, really in 1959, took a few years, but by 75, in the early 70s, China sort of leaned to the United States as a foil against Russia, or the Soviet Union. But by doing that, they lost a lot of confidence in African states because of who the United States supported in various African conflicts. So a picture's worth 1,000 words. This sort of depicts who I call the new Chinese emperor and his relationship with African states. And if you can see there, he is giving sustenance to many different African states. So my presentations, I like to borrow headlines from various publications. So Foreign Policy is one of the publications that really believes that Beijing's current Africa policy may be good for African states. So when they articulate that for West, failed states are a problem, for China they're an opportunity, and you've heard about the Belt and Road Initiative and how Chinese have invested heavily in Africa. perhaps for nefarious reasons, and some of the headlines I will show articulate that. But the truth is that China is very engaged in Africa. Their air traffic between Africa and since 2010 has increased 630%. 10 years ago, one airline flew from China to Africa, and now there are 8. Trade between China and Africa has grown from 10 billion to 190 billion. It's up to this year, I think it's going to be $230 billion. These are just some graphics to show you the trend in investment in Africa and trade with Africa from China. That's what those passengers at 630% are doing. It's mostly about oil, particularly in the early relationships, the early days, about fuel. These are what, just a graphic showing what minerals, metals, and machinery, that's mostly China imports minerals and exports machinery and other items. There are 53 or 52, depending on you count, countries in Africa. China is involved in all of them in some fashion, some more than others. I'm sorry, China is involved in all but one country, which still holds diplomatic relations with Taiwan. So African countries jointly owe China about 130 billion. I think that's up to about 180 billion now. And you'll see the difference in how China and the United States invest in Africa. Color on this is, but the solid shows, those are gifts, those are development assistance dollars. And the lighter portion, those are loans. So the United States gifts African countries quite a bit in development aid, and China gifts a much lower proportion in development aid, and they expect repayment for investment, much more so than the United States. This number of African students studying China has increased. It's increased exponentially because Chinese pay for African students to study in China. So I made my 74th trip to China, 40 trips to China, 72nd or 73rd trip to Africa last October. And I've dealt in 19 different African countries with their militaries, and when every single one, majors, mini majors, field grade officers sport on their uniform a medallion from the Chinese Command and Staff College where they go for free. You compare that to IMEP programs here in the United States, and it's not even close. Chinese have more embassies in Africa than the United States. So we've talked in the past about Chinese principles of foreign policy, non-aggression, mutual respect. But a hallmark of Chinese foreign policy until recently was that they had no overseas bases. They weren't like the United States, who has bases all over the world. Well, China does not have bases all over the world, but they have one now in Djibouti, I think about 9 miles from our base. And this is not just a little base, and it's expanding. So this is a difference in defense strategies, and you can read this as well as I can. Beijing has a much more comprehensive approach. They include what our last panelists would consider integrated planning, and that's what they do. Arms sales, medical assistance, training troops, anti-piracy drills, investment. So their foreign policy toward and international security policy, frankly, toward China is much more comprehensive and integrated. The United States, particularly in the last 10, 12 years, has been primarily focused on counterterrorism. That's been our approach. So we don't have time, but if you can go to that website, if you want to learn more about China's military base in Djibouti, this is an excellent 20-minute program that's very comprehensive. The Chinese do conduct military operations, conducted military operations in Africa. I'll let you read that, mostly NEO operations, but they do have a military sales program and military training program, and they are now, I think, the #1 peacekeeping force in Africa. I think the Chinese, I'm pretty sure this is correct, have more peacekeepers working for the UN than any other country in Africa. And, at least by rumor, there are more plans for more military bases, particularly naval-type bases. Small, probably, but still provide resupply for their emerging blue water fleet. So I talked before about headlines from periodicals, and there's a debate about whether or not China's aid to Africa or investment in Africa is a good thing or a bad thing, monster or messiah. So Business Day, reputable periodical, says the investment in China is a good thing. China is Africa's biggest trade partner and is helping develop the continent's infrastructure. That's a headline. Foreign policy again, Chinese aid and investment are good for Africa. Namibia, Namibia says China is not colonizing Africa. This is according to China state media, but reported in Reuters. But not all agree. So some monster takeouts would be an article called The New Imperialism, and the title is Why China is Taking Over Africa's Resources One Country at a Time. And you can see in the graphic there the amount of the percentage of resources, natural resources that are extracted from Africa that go to China, and a very smaller number to Europe and the United States. So getting a little bit more dramatic or the rape of Africa by China in the African Post, and the Spectator, the truth about China's investment in Africa, which is not very favorable to China. Financial Times, Chinese model is failing Africa, struggling infrastructure projects. And previous, Kelly Hicks talked yesterday about the debt crisis. Others have talked about the debt crisis. I won't go into it. But not all African countries have been impressed with the Belt and Road Initiative. In fact, Sierra Leone has scrapped plans to build China-funded airport. It just cost too much money. So booming Chinese investment is a good thing, or booming Chinese investment is a bad thing. There's probably no definitive answer. I will tell you that there are now 1.2 million Chinese in Africa, and many are not returning to China. So what should the U.S. response be to Chinese involvement in Africa? Cooperation, competition, containment, confrontation, or conflict? Or as one of our speakers yesterday implied, do we let China overextend and self-destruct? So we won't come to an answer in this particular luncheon session, but if this were a class, we would have all of you give your opinions on these 6 C's. Leveraging U.S. SOF. This is not rocket science for all of you. How should the U.S. react? Increased presence, yes. Africa really is the next boom continent, at least in my opinion. Now, a lot of, you will hear from some people that the average wage in many African countries is about $2 to $3 a day. And so how could we make any money there? What would commercial interests be? The bottom line is they make $3 a day. There's a billion of them and they spend $3 a day. So it will be a booming continent. What is required there is asymmetric, not overwhelming parity with China. Special ops are good in gray zone operations for all the reasons in the right-hand column. And so leveraging soft mission-centric conditions, priorities, would be the sort of perfect complement to an integrated approach to Africa. I encourage all of you to read or go to this website and see this program, How Africa is Becoming China's China. It lays out in much better detail what I have tried to impart today. We'll fast forward to great power competition in Africa, and this was a Russia focus. These are our themes, very similar to our China themes. The historical involvement, Russia has not been that involved in China. So unlike other European powers, Russia was not a colonizer. So therefore, during the Cold War, the competition between the East and West was played out in Africa, but the African states or emerging states after the colonial period, they sort of favored Russia or then the Soviet Union, because Russia had not been a colonizer of Africa. In the post-World War II environment, in the competition with the United States, after World War II, those African states I mentioned before, they tried to overthrow the colonial powers. And while victory over fascism saved the world from fascism, it spelled the end of the colonial system. So World War II really, in effect, started and prompted African nationalists to overthrow the colonial system, for which the Soviet Union was more than happy to help. It wasn't really, though, until the Cold War that Russia developed diplomatic relations with several African countries. This way was to counter US influence. So here's sort of a depiction of, in blue, the sort of countries that sided with the US in Africa and those that sided with the Soviet Union or the Warsaw Pact. The Soviet Union was aggressive in supplying arms and equipment, and material, and military advisors to several African states. There's some KGB folks in Namibia. So the surrogates or proxies that the Soviets used in Africa were from Cuba. At one time, there were 36,000 Cuban military personnel in the Angolan Civil War, and there are some on a tank that I'm sure many in this room recognize. So following the Cold War, there wasn't much Russian involvement in Africa until the early 2000s, when Russian President Vladimir Putin began to show limited interest. By 2014, because of sanctions placed on Russia by the US and Western states, Putin took many steps to let the relationship with Africa, economic relationship, sort of supplant some of the negative effects of the sanctions by the West. So they expanded access to natural resources in Africa, exports, they tried to expand. So they basically tried to make up the shortfall from the sanctions by doing business with Africa. And there's a pictogram, their activities, mostly overall most African states. The trade between Russia and African states grew by 185%, but when you start from really nothing, the 185% is kind of an interesting figure. Their trade, Russian trade with Africa, is only about 10% of China's trade. And you can see the colors are hard to see there, but China exceeds Russia by a great amount. If you look at all of the countries that do business with Africa and the percentages, the Russians aren't even on the chart. They are after natural resources in Africa. About 1/3 of their imports are agriculture, including what you see there. Nuclear agreements. Both China and Russia are aggressively trying to sell nuclear power plants to several Russian states. The Russians have security cooperation agreements with many African countries. It's primarily for weapons sales, however. They don't, like the Chinese, have IMF programs where they, in large numbers, take African military officers for training or education in Russia. So the Russians view Africa as a major potential weapons market. And I'm just going to fast forward it here, but the Russians actually have military agreements with about 2/3 of the African states. You can see these here. I have personal knowledge or experience of the Central African Republic. Last September, I was there working for a naval postgraduate school initiative. And there is one hotel where Westerners can stay in the capital. And in the restaurant and bar at night, my Russian, actually more than a Russian counterpart, and members of his team were there. It was surreal, really. So Russia now provides the president of Africa with his security teams training, and perhaps even provides security for the president of Central African Republic. So a well-known Russian African studies expert, this is a comment: there will be a battle for Africa and it will grow. So what should the U.S. do? In similar way that we should counter China and Africa. These are recommendations. So in my opinion, Russia is more of a bit player on the African continent than the Chinese. China is the main potential adversary. We can, like we did during the Cold War, we did a pretty good job, the U.S. did, of challenging Russian propaganda efforts. And so we should relearn how to do that. This is what U.S. Special Operations Forces can do. Very similar to what I advocated, we advocated for the against China. Use our customary roles and capabilities, maybe reprioritize some of them, not so much direct action related, but great opportunity for MISO and civil affairs in Africa for counter both Russia and particularly China. These are my recommendations, self-serving. That is me in the picture, and the woman standing next to me is the Minister of Defense for the Central African Republic. She's an amazing lady and a very good person to drink a beer with at her house. That is a very quick overview of Russia and China and Africa, and I'm going to defer now to Ms. Margaret Nencheck, who's the CAG, or for the commander of SOCAFRICA. Margaret, I think you're at your house because you're not in the office.
Yes, sir, that's true. They let me escape, or I actually used a retirement ceremony as an excuse to sneak out the back door. So Don't tell Major General Anderson that I'm here right now and not on the clock.
All right, I won't, but it's lunchtime anyway. So Margaret, the floor is yours.
Thank you, sir. First, I'd like to say thank you to General Howard for this opportunity. It represents a great opportunity for me. And I'd also like to thank Dr. Wilson, Major Mott, and the entire JSOU team. So while I know this has been covered initially, I just want to reaffirm that what I'm about to talk about is drawn from my experiences supporting Special Operations Command Africa, but is by no means meant to be taken as endorsement by the command, either SOCOM or AFRICOM. And I also know that some of my colleagues are out there, many of whom I'm certain know more about this and have way more experience than I do. So I'd mentioned that what I'm going to talk about just for the next few minutes is not meant to be all inclusive, but it's one way that I think we can use to describe this problem set and just offer a glimpse of what we are doing about it at SOCAFRICA. So thus far, I know in the seminar you've talked about the geostrategic context and changes in great, or as we refer to it at AFRICOM, global power competition, as to not overinflate the status of our competitors. We've heard about capabilities and intent of China and Russia and how those factors have impacted the role that SOF can play in campaigning against these compound security threats. You heard General Howard provide excellent background on both China and Russia's historic involvement in Africa, what their current interests and activities are, and how that's impacted the operational environment. But before discussing in greater detail some of the things that we're doing about it now, and some of the points that General Howard brought up with how the US or SOF in particular should react, I just want to take a brief step back. Not only within SOCOM, but across the greater Department of Defense, with finite resources and capabilities, and in light of those specific requirements outlined by the National Defense Strategy, our decision makers have been forced to make difficult choices. There are widely varied threats around the world, more than we can counter, and we're forced to take a look at those things with a critical eye, focusing on those that are most important to our national security interests. I suspect that many of you are familiar with the guidance that we need to prioritize SOF activities by what we must do, that is which is essential and where we cannot accept risk, what we should do, which is necessary, but we may have to mitigate some risk, and then what we could do, something that's possible, but we may have to weigh the risks or prioritize resources based on competing requirements. I would make the argument that engagement in Africa is a must-do, and this is why. I personally believe, after nearly 4 years working this problem set, that it is worth competing in Africa. Africa is the world's second largest continent, has the highest population or second highest population in the world, and according to UN estimates, the population may reach 2.5 billion by 2050 and account for approximately 26% of the world's population. The Africa Group of the United Nations consists of 54 member states, which is the largest regional group by numbers and equates to 28% of UN votes. Of note, China and South Africa are currently non-permanent members of the UN Security Council, and although South Africa's term expires at the end of the year, Tunisia and Kenya both join in 2021. And then, as discussed by many experts in your seminar already, the continent represents trillions of dollars in economic opportunity for US investment. Another reason why Africa is a key playing field for global power competition is because that's where our adversaries have chosen to compete. Since at least 2009, and probably well before that, Chinese Communist Party think tanks have been discussing the PRC's engagements in and strategy for Africa. Africa is central to GPC because that's how they see it. They don't see themselves as isolated to the Pacific. And much like General Howard just said, Russia is a bit more of a bit player on the continent, but they're in the shaping phase of their operations. What we've seen is that both engagement strategies by Russia, China, and I would say probably some of the middle powers, especially Gulf states, those strategies do present some potential vulnerabilities. They may stretch themselves thin, occasionally stumble through clumsy actions, like some of the Chinese responses to COVID in Africa. And oftentimes, these folks aren't really well regarded by the Africans, many of whom see China and Russia as using them as proxies or middlemen to compete with us or becoming the new colonizers of the 21st century. And finally, while not a focus of this seminar, I do think it's important to consider the current state of the operational environment in Africa. terrorists, violent extremist organizations, and criminal gangs actively exploit fragile, conflict-prone environments across Africa to either destabilize or destroy governance, replacing it with extreme alternatives, or further exploiting the resulting undergoverned spaces for their own benefit. The unclassified source, ACLID, the Armed Conflict Location and Data Event Project, referred to the Sahel as the most likely to be the geopolitical dilemma of 2019. And unfortunately, that's a phenomenon that we have witnessed at SOCAFRICA firsthand, with the rapid rise of violence and resultant humanitarian crisis in Burkina Faso, upwards of 1 million internally displaced persons now. This recent August military uprising in Mali, and the emergent ISIS-linked network in liquid natural gas-rich Cabo Delgado, Mozambique. Nigeria is actually the third country in the world most impacted by terrorism, behind only Iraq and Afghanistan. And Somalia ranks 6th in the world on the Global Terrorism Index, where groups like Al-Qaeda-affiliated Al-Shabaab continue to plot attacks against US citizens, our interests, and our allies. It's under these dire conditions that many African nations struggle to address the intensity and expansion of Salafi jihadist violence, while they can currently have to deal with other problems, from food insecurity to civil unrest and a whole host of others. As a result, African leaders are actively seeking counter-VEO assistance. And I like to think about it, if we frame this as a marketing challenge, the value proposition of US SOF is that we provide a dual use capability. We can counter VEOs that threaten US interests while simultaneously competing with global powers in Africa. As briefly discussed, our customers, or our African partners, they need assistance. We heard firsthand from an African military official last year, I won't call them out by name, but he said, "A drowning man refuses no hand." African nations are willing to look at a variety of offerings to address their needs. And the marketplace is crowded with donors, European Union and NATO and UN training missions, and various states offering bilateral military, economic, and political deals to willing counterparts. We know that China and Russia offer such services. We've heard about just a few of those examples in General Howard's presentations. And oftentimes those are quicker, easier, sometimes seem cheaper, and many times have fewer strings attached. I would offer, however, that the value of the US SOF brand lies in our ability to build capacity. We don't just supply guns, uniforms, and ammo. It's our foundation. Our foundation is the wealth of knowledge in counterterrorism and counterinsurgency that's been built upon the last 19 years of conflict and the sacrifice of thousands of Americans. We also offer long-term benefits through US leadership that cannot be underestimated. We provide a convening authority, connecting partners, building relationships, and enabling others to achieve greater success than they would alone. Obviously, there's lots of operations, activities, and investments in the AFRICOM AOR that we can't discuss in this forum right now. But there are a few examples that I'd like to touch on to illustrate this concept in practice. One of those is our annual SOF exercise called Flintlock. General Howard has been a part of this before, and he can provide his perspective in a couple of minutes when we wrap this up and hopefully have time for some questions and discussion. But in this exercise, SOCAFRICA brings together European and Western partners and allies, along with African SOF units. But it's not just an event where we pair up and run through Styx lanes or do basic practice, shoot, move, and communicate type skills. Since this exercise came together in its current form back in 2007, we've continually adapted and evolved the scenario so that we respond to some of these emergent threats. We've encouraged greater investment from other contributors, whether it be NATO leaving instruction, which simultaneously builds interoperability with our allies, to an African partner flying their own C-130s to move exercise participants from one location to the training sites, or having another partner who started off as a participant, becoming and evolving an exporter of security that wants to wants to lead training of another regional ally, such as providing certified instructors to give medical training to another African SOF unit. It may sound trivial and like it's not that big of a deal, but when you have an ambassador from a NATO ally tell our CG during the exercise, and I'll paraphrase here, that this is how the United States competes and wins. China can't do anything like this. They could never pull it off. And even if they did, we wouldn't want to come. And this is why the United States is the best. Counter-VEO and GPC don't have to be mutually exclusive. I think another brief example lies in our long-term commitment. General Howard mentioned the IMET program. And that's why it's more than just an exercise like Flintlock or persistent engagement in a place like Somalia that has benefit. We can use episodic engagements like JSETs, subject matter expert exchanges, or mill-to-mill partnerships to build those relationships. Things like having young aspiring leaders from African countries attend Ranger School or the Q course. Investments like those allow us, the United States, to cultivate future generations of SOF leaders who will hopefully rise to the level being their country's SOCOM commander, a chief of defense, or other leadership positions, while we simultaneously cultivate that partnership with the United States. Much like the soft truth that competent SOF cannot be built after a crisis occurs, the same holds true for building relationships and cultivating placement and access. US SOF, with their ability to operate in small teams in austere environments, without the long and cumbersome support structures often required for conventional military footprints, are ideally suited for Africa. They also sometimes present more palatable options for US ambassadors and partner nations to support, but in ways that build relationships and cultivate that access when it might be needed the most. The leadership we provide comes at a very small cost, but yields exceptionally high returns. We're able to bring like-minded players together in a way that helps promote our collective democratic value system over the alternatives offered by our adversaries like China and Russia. So in summary, I do believe that Africa is an essential playing field for global power competition. We don't always get to pick where we compete, and we've seen that both China, Russia, and other aspiring global powers have chosen to engage in Africa. If we choose not to compete, we will see vital influence to our competitors. I think our value proposition is that we can offer long-term investment in capacity, unmatchable competence, and humble leadership in a way that advances US interests, help our African partners deal with some of the destabilizing threats that they face, and allow us to simultaneously compete with those global powers. So I hope that was somewhat useful to those that are not as intimately familiar with what SOF is doing in Africa. I know there's many more examples out there and probably many in the audience that know well more than I do, but I hope this at least sparks a little bit of conversation. And I think that we're able to take questions if that's a part of the agenda, sir. So thank you very much.
Margaret, excellent job. I think we're going to try something here. We're going to are we going to have people from the audience ask questions or no? Okay, I thought we were. I misunderstood. So I've got a couple questions here from the audience, and one has to do with the pandemic. So it's kind of a two-part question. We haven't heard much about the COVID pandemic from Africa. In fact, information coming out sort of indicates that it's not the problem there that it is in Europe or the United States or other places. So I'd be curious to hear any updated data on the pandemic. And then how is the pandemic, for what you can tell us, how has the pandemic affected special operations activities in Africa? You may not be able to answer the last one, that'd be okay, but the first one we'd like your insights on particularly.
Yes, sir, thank you. So interesting question. We have been closely tracking what's been going on with COVID throughout probably since early March when it started to break. Actually, kind of a funny story. I was on travel and we were in East Africa. We were actually in Nairobi doing a battlefield circulation when we started to hear rumors that things were going to get locked down. And there was talk about us maybe having to divert to go to Ethiopia. And when we were faced with the choice of either hightail it back to Stuttgart to get home or face potential lockdown in Addis, we decided to get on the next plane smoking so that we could get back to Stuttgart. A little bit a better environment to deal with the lockdown. But what I'd like to say is that we have seen COVID impacts on the continent. One of the interesting things that we noticed was a perception, and a lot of it has to do with the information operations that our competitors conduct, was that cease some activities. We were able to keep engaged, and I think that was another testament to what we were able to do. I can't really speak too much of how COVID has impacted the continent, at least from what we're seeing. One of the challenges that's going to be long-term is that the compression of the global economy and the economic impact are going to be felt very hard in Africa, which is only going to exacerbate the challenges that these governments are facing. especially when you throw in corruption on top of the other security threats. So I think it's something that we'll have to monitor very closely, and that while the disease itself hasn't necessarily impacted African populations the same way it has perhaps in the United States or Europe, that the long-term impacts, especially economic, are going to be very, very difficult to overcome. I hope that at least addresses part of the question, and I apologize, I'm not quite the expert in that topic.
No, you did a great job. So here's another question from the audience, Margaret, and they're all going to be for you because you're there. The question is there a renewed focus on building partner capacity programs in support of our African allies at SOCAFRICA? Also, is SOCAFRICA seen as a key tool for AFRICOM to achieve these types of objectives?
I wouldn't say that it's a renewed focus. I think it's a continual focus. And for certain, SOCAFRICA is definitely a part of that. Thankfully, AFRICOM is lucky to have a great number of components that all do their part. We have wonderful partnerships with the components from Marine Corps, Navy, and Air Force, and Army. And those of you who may have paid attention to this problem set a little bit more have probably heard about the deployment of the Army's special, the SFABs to Africa, which is actually a great thing for SOCAF, because it allows us to focus on those things that are SOF specific, or where we need to do something that's more SOF specific, than allows us to expand that collective US influence. So I wouldn't characterize it as a renewed focus. I'd say it's a continual focus. And I think that's important because as we look at finite resources, important things to SOCOM, like readiness and technological advancements and things that we maybe need to reinvest in, building partner capacity is something that isn't as expensive, that we can still do with the limited resources that we have.
So I'm going to take the next one. It says, as it pertains to soft power, debt trap diplomacy has rapidly become a characterization of Chinese development finance in Africa. What have African leaders appreciated about U.S. aid and development finance, and what have they communicated as its shortcomings? So I'm going to start it, Margaret, and then you can evaluate my answer, and then I'd like for you to chime in after I give this a shot, okay? So I'm going to relate a story that happened in Senegal with me about 7 years ago, when this first Chinese debt diplomacy was being questioned by African leaders. And actually, Margaret alluded to this in her presentation. So I was at a lunch with mid-level bureaucrats, really, from 4 different African countries: Chad, Senegal, Mauritania, and I kind of forget the other one. So we were at lunch, and so I was explaining, I think, I said, you need to be careful. I speak Chinese, I lived in China. I mean, it may sound like all this development money, but it could have a sort of a nefarious or negative impact on your country. And so I won't discuss the whole conversation, but collectively they said, well, look, what is the United States doing for us? What is the European doing for us? The Chinese are the only ones that are offering us development aid. And they couched it in development aid, even though they were loans primarily. So it's like Margaret said, they are, and with the United States, of course, for many reasons, United States, when they compete with China and Russia, and they have one hand tied behind their back, because if there's any notion of human rights violations, or if a country has just conducted a coup, the United States is prohibited from doing economic development or any other kind of development or IMET with an African state. So African countries are aware that the Chinese may have sort of nefarious, their loans or their development aid may have nefarious intentions, but they don't have many other choices. So Margaret, is that a fair assessment?
Yes, sir. I would definitely say so. We have noticed that while our policies do somewhat limit us at times, we do have something that most of our partners want. So the challenge is figuring out how to creatively navigate those situations. The other thing is that we've done, I think, sometimes a poor job of articulating what it is that we're looking for. And one of the things that we've heard comments on at work several times is that we shouldn't, a lot of people like to use the phrase, United States, we want to be the partner of choice. And that sometimes presents itself as binary. It's either us or them. And as many of our partners, they don't like to be told who they don't want to be told, oh, you can only partner with the United States, and that means you can't partner with somebody else, or you can't accept something from somebody else. And so we need to make sure that we are a little more nuanced in our approach with our partners, because they're doing things that are in their own national interest, and we shouldn't dismiss that. The other thing is there's plenty of examples that we could benefit or take advantage of the investments that, whether it's the Chinese, the Russians, or a Gulf state are making. So if China is building a road someplace, and that means that our MRAPs aren't getting washed out in a flood during the rainy season, that's maybe not necessarily a bad thing. Or if they're giving some type of equipment, like let's say they're providing mortars to somebody, but we're able to then utilize that to help improve base defense with one of our partners that we're working with, that isn't necessarily a bad thing either. So I think we have to be a little more nuanced in our understanding and our approach, and figure out what actually requires competition and what we need to stop, which might be a nation choosing an alternative value system to our own, or when a country is making an economic decision that's in their own best interest and realizing that they're entitled to do that. It's how do we work within that system? So I think responses just sometimes require a little more nuanced understanding, and that's something that we all need to continue, I'm certainly myself included, continually educate ourselves on those things.
Great answer. This next question is really for both of us too, and I'll sort of talk in a macro sense, and then Margaret maybe more tactical. It's a long question, so hold on here. Do you think our diplomats, intelligence personnel, and SOF operators have a sufficient understanding of and knowledge about Chinese strategy, objectives, tactics, etc.? We focus training and education and preparation on the region in which we live and operate. Given competition with China and Africa, are we educating U.S. personnel sufficiently about China to effectively compete with China and Africa? Do we need to alter our training programs and PME? The answer is no and yes. We don't give enough, we don't educate well enough our SOF or other military personnel on Chinese strategy, objectives, tactics, strategic culture. I'll give an example. A year and a half ago, Kelly Hicks and I were asked to do a one-week course here on the China, the near-peer competitor. I think we had like 37 to 40 students. It was in this room, actually. And about 10 of them actually had China desk jobs or new GPC jobs, not just in the command, but other organizations. And truthfully, you know, what they knew about China was big country, big population, and that was about it. So, I mean, it was very instructive to me. So, do we need to alter our training programs in PME? Yes, I think we need to take the national security strategy at its word. And we do need to teach strategic culture. Mirror imaging was used, I think, 5 times yesterday by panelists, that we tend to mirror image and think that Russia too and China will, based on the same inputs, will react similarly to what the United States would do, which is absolutely incorrect. So if you don't have an appreciation for Chinese culture, Chinese history, Chinese strategic culture, Chinese strategies, which frankly, in many ways haven't changed since the 3rd century BC, you know, you're going to be, I think you're at a disadvantage when you're dealing with China close and personal in Africa or any other place. So yes, I think we need to alter our training and really our education programs and professional military education. That would be my answer. So Margaret, what do you think?
No, sir, I completely agree. I won't date myself by saying when this happened, but I remember going through the military intelligence officer basic course and knowing that in a few months I was going to be deploying to Iraq, but we were still learning about Soviet order of battle for tank divisions. And I was fairly confident that was not the type of IPB that I was going to have to do when I showed up at FOB Spiker in Iraq. But we're slow to evolve sometimes, and we're slow to adapt, and I think we need to be more dynamic. We also need to make sure that, and this goes back a little bit to what I mentioned for the previous question, we have to be more nuanced. We sometimes look at Africa and look at a few data points and then take an area, for example, the Sahel, which is the size of the continental United States, and then color in a country red because of some, you know, quote unquote Chinese or Russian influence. And that's not a very, I think, nuanced approach, and we need to do our best to get some more granular data and then figure out what those responses are. I think also there's a bit of a challenge that even goes back to the national defense strategy, where it says competition, but what does that mean after that? How exactly do we compete? And I think that hopefully for the rest of this seminar, you will have greater discussion and maybe come up with some solutions and some ideas on how exactly we do that in practice. But I think we do need to focus more on those specific things that we can do and what it actually means to try and achieve U.S. objectives. But to Colonel Maxwell's point, I do definitely agree that we need to do more. We need to alter our training, and that we need to continually adapt and evolve, even if to General Howard's point, their strategy may not have changed since the 3rd century. How it's implemented has changed, especially in a globally connected world. We need to continually look at how we respond to those things more dynamically.
Thank you, Margaret. I think we really run out of time for questions. Thank you so much for joining us today. For all of those in the audience, I coerced Ms. Nencheck to do this. She was a student of mine at West Point more years ago than either one of us would like to let you know. So Margaret, thanks. Say hello to everybody over at SOCAF for us, and thanks for participating. Appreciate it very much.